Exactly. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's most likely because you know
I can't recall doing anything specifically with that.
You're what?
I mean, they're like 10
Becky works at, you must, she's a worker, right? Yes, Becky did. Oh, that's why I know. Okay. Because Clay and my daughter Balogh were really good friends. And not in school together. I was like, yeah. Yes. Okay. I do like Becky. I think it's your house. Oh, we missed Clay. How'd you do Let's get back together. We should just try to get him. Well, it's good to see you again. I knew your face. That's crazy about everybody's Super excited about
Any day now. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Well, we've got all of our technology set up. We have our expert here, and it is a beautiful morning in Western North Carolina. I sense a touch of fall in the air, which is kind of nice to feel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Janet Moore, and I'm the president of the board of Carolina Public Press. And on behalf of all of our board members, I want to welcome you to this morning's Newsmaker Forum. The Newsmakers Forum is an idea of this remarkable woman right here, along with a lot of other things that happen at Carolina Public Press. And before I go any further, I want to recognize Frank Taylor, who is here and is on the staff of Carolina Public Press. Frank has really done some amazing reporting. If you haven't followed what he's done, I hope you will check the website and see what he is doing, because he's an essential member of our team. But the Newsmakers Forum is an opportunity for something we don't always have these days, and that is civil and civic dialogue on top issues in our region. And there's no other place that offers this but Carolina Public Press. I want to thank our sponsors, AB Tech, Lenoir-Rhyne University, and Self-Help Credit Union. We really appreciate their support in making these events happen. So now, as you can guess, I'm going to very quickly go into my shameless pitch. That's why I'm here. If you feel that this kind of thing matters, if you believe that the kind of reporting we do matters, then I really hope you will become a member, subscribe, and even go as far as donating. The work we do as a nonprofit relies very heavily on the gifts of individuals. So I hope you will consider, after today, making a gift. Thank you so much. And with that, that's the end of my shameless pitch. I'm going to turn it over to Angie.
Thank you, Janet. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I'm the Executive Director of Carolina Public Press, and thank you, Janet. We have a tremendous board of directors who is shepherding our vision of being a leading public policy, public interest reporting news organization for Western North Carolina. We're independent, we're nonprofit, which makes us a little bit different from our friends in the for-profit press around Western North Carolina. And we hope, as Janet mentioned, that you'll go to carolinapublicpress.org and see some of the reporting we've been doing, most recently on the adult care home system in North Carolina, which Frank has done just a tremendous job of an investigative reporting project on that. So, but we've been reporting about domestic violence since we started in 2011. a lot of other people do in the news. We often hear about it when there's a tragedy. But we want to take the conversation a little bit deeper with these amazing panelists who've joined us today. This is the type of conversation that we have regularly, and we hope you'll join us in the future too. So I want to introduce these great people. To my left is Kathleen Balogh, and in your program there's a bio of everyone. So because we have such a short time together, I'm not going to go into all their numerous accolades, and I had to do some, put my tough editor hat on and get it in a small spot for all these great people. But we're really pleased you could join us, Kathleen.
Thank you.
A lot of you know Sheriff Van Duncan, who is, I think, retiring after this term. I know lots of people will shed a tear, but I think there's also some folks who are looking to try to fill his shoes, who are in the audience here today too. So thank you for joining us. And he's actually our first repeat panelist, so we really appreciate him making a double appearance for us. And to his left is Romeo, and she's with Meridian Behavioral Health Services. And to her left is Salley Stepp, who gets the award for coming from Brevard. So we really appreciate her coming. And she's with SAFE Incorporated of Transylvania County. So we actually cover, our news organization covers Western North Carolina, and by that we mean 19 counties. So though we often hold these forums in Asheville, we're also live streaming so people can join us from wherever they may be. We really want to provide an opportunity for a regional conversation. So we often talk a lot about Buncombe. Buncombe gets a lot of attention, but there's 18 other counties out there who we also want to pay attention to. So thank you, Salley, for joining us. So what's going to happen today is that we'll spend about an hour, the panelists and I, talking about the topic, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A for you all. And there's also people who are watching on the live stream who can text in questions as well. So thank you all. So I wanted to start out just a little bit with the broad stroke. How do we know domestic violence is a problem? It shows up in the news, and certainly one tragedy is too much. But where is it? How can community members tell where the problems are happening the most? We know from our reporting several years ago that law enforcement at that time, it was a self-reported scenario, and there were some counties in which we had no data because that law enforcement agency did not respond to any kind of survey or request for information about domestic violence. Is that still the case, and how can people tell? Sheriff, would you like to take that on?
Sure.
Or is there someone else?
No, and I'm glad to. I just don't want to take up too much time with history. But Buncombe County, we got to where we are now really from the year 2013. We had 13 homicides in Buncombe County that year. 7 of them were determined to be domestic violence related homicides, and the state has a little bit different criteria than what we do as far as with the Family Justice Center in narrowing those type of crimes. So really what the Family Justice Center looks at is intimate partner domestic violence, which is what most of us really think of as domestic violence. The state, if you've got family members living together, son, mother, and there's a homicide there, they would include that in that number, and that's really not, even though it's tragic, that's not the main issue that we know that we can get in front of and hopefully prevent. Holly Jones is here today, and I'm glad she's here today because she was very pivotal in bringing a lot of this to the attention of the public. And she came to me and she said, we've got to do something. And she actually calls me to get educated, to try to figure out what we can do to get in front of this issue. And like I say, I don't want to take too much time and take it. I think you've got another question about what happens if somebody reports domestic violence. And what you see now from a law enforcement response, and I can tell you from Buncombe County, and I think most other law enforcement agencies are moving in that direction, is they really kind of pick up and take the lead in making sure that that individual has every option, that they're safe, The law actually came out to support us in making and having a pro arrest policy. So if we go on a scene and we see that there's probable cause that there's been an assault and we can determine a primary aggressor, we make an arrest. The North Carolina statute says you shall. At that point in time, we do a lethality assessment, which is part of our bigger triaging of what's going on. And once we determine who that primary aggressor is, we put them on the phone with HelpMate, or we put them on the phone with another partner from the FJC that can do that wraparound support service. And even though that's pretty detailed, that's very lacking in detail for all the things that go into the wraparound services for victims of family violence.
So at that point, Kathleen and Sheriff, what happens with that? How is it reported to the state then, so that we're able to analyze if domestic violence is getting better or worse in a particular county? How do we?
So I'd like to address that. And so with the North Carolina Council for Women and Youth Involvement organization, I am with Department of Administration under the state government. And we are a funding source for domestic violence and sexual assault agencies. Salley, Stepp from Transylvania, their agency down there receives funding through the state to do domestic violence and sexual assault work. You know, the fact of whether domestic violence exists or doesn't exist, or whether data is collected or isn't collected, is different from across the state. I work with 23 counties as the Western Region Director. I go over up to Mecklenburg County. I don't do Mecklenburg, but all the counties west of there is my territory. And so as you can imagine, you know, you have teeny tiny, very rural counties, Buncombe County, Henderson County, Haywood County are really in connection with the different judicial districts. Everybody approaches it a little differently. I remember the very first time, I've been doing the work since 1998, and the very first time I was down in Clay County, Hayesville, I remember talking with the board of directors for the domestic violence sexual assault agency there, and having there were law enforcement officials that were there on the group that I was working with, and they actually said that doesn't happen here. So you know, we've come miles from where we were. It feels like little tiny baby steps because there's still so much work to be done. But so the sexual assault and domestic violence agencies report to the Council for Women statistical data on how many crisis calls are received, how many individuals come through the shelter, what types of services are provided. We have a set of services that they're asked to do. And so we have those statistics available at the Council for Women website. If anybody is interested, you certainly can go to the website to find the statistical reports based on county. And you know, we all know that this happens behind closed doors. We can only report on those people who actually are able to get to services and report, or at a point where they feel that that's the step they want to take.
So do you also track the type of incident, if it's, you know, a gun is being used, or if it's fists, or is it, you know, man, woman, male, woman, you know?
So the Council for Women does not collect that data, but yeah, that is reported.
We actually use a statewide data system called OSIM. It's required of all domestic violence sexual assault agencies in the state of North Carolina. I don't know that they all use it, but we certainly do. And basically that does ask those specific questions about the type of violence, whether or not there's weapons used in the course of the violence. It asks those questions about how many people were in the household. And so it's a very comprehensive data collection system. And we use that system to provide the reports to not only the Council for Women, but to the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission. We use that data to submit grant applications to other funding sources.
And what are you seeing since 2013? What's been happening in the past 3 or 4 years in both of your experiences?
We saw, when we started really becoming aware of all the complexity and nuances that surround domestic violence, we saw because of that. And I can't tell you exactly which pieces mattered most, but because of that awareness, we saw an immediate reduction in our intimate partner domestic homicide rate. It went down, I want to say, it was about 18 months before we had another one, which one is too many, but our rate actually fell. You talk about the reporting. We received a grant from the Governor's Crown Commission to support our Family Justice Center, and because of that grant, we're reporting a tremendous amount of data. We're also figuring out how to have internal dashboards to where when you ask a question like you're asking, well, what's the split? I can tell you right now, we can look in the way we track how long we stay on a domestic violence call, how many of those we have, what are the trends, are they going up, are they going down, how long they take to complete the LAP form, how many arrests based to calls, and how many LAPs are being done, or lethality assessment protocols are being done, as opposed to how many calls we're responding to. So we're still kind of, even though we're kind of, I'd like to say ahead of the curve, I think.
Yes, very much so.
We're still trying to figure out how to best analyze that data and figure out exactly what it means,
and then how to use it and share it with clinicians and shelters, I imagine.
And yes, and I will sum it up with this. What we knew would probably happen from looking at other communities that had kind of done what we were getting ready to do before we got there. As you see an increase in calls, you see an increase in arrests. So you think your problem's actually getting worse, but what's actually happening is you're identifying the problem and you're addressing it. And then after a period of time, you start to level off and start to decrease. And we're right there at that tipping point around calls and arrests.
I just wanted to add that when it comes to prevalence of domestic violence and you know, if it's happening, if it's getting reported, the coordinated community response is really what you look to. Buncombe County has an amazing coordinated community response. So in 2013, you know, you mentioned earlier, you all have resources. So those resources came together, and I think it's a larger conversation about how, you know, what's going on in the DV systems, what's going on with funding, what's going on politically. Meridian I can't speak to Buncombe County, but we work in the 7 most western counties. Clay County is one of them, and Haywood County, our coordinated community response, is working really well, and it's really modeled after Buncombe County. We get a lot of leadership from Buncombe County. Those more rural counties where, you know, Kathleen gets the reports, we're not getting the referrals, we're not getting the reports, and it isn't at the fault of anybody. Everybody's well-intentioned, but it's a lack of resources, and it's a lack of that coordinated community response. So people aren't necessarily coming together. So it's going to reflect and look like, oh well, domestic violence doesn't happen in Clay County, when we know that wherever there's people and relationships, domestic violence is happening.
Yeah, it brings us to the question of like how victims' experiences do really differ county to county.
So can I talk about it from a rural county perspective? And I'm going to go back a little bit. When the Family Justice Center had the grand opening, I was invited to come to the grand opening by one of our county commissioners, who actually is a member of the Women for Women. And so we were driving back after the people talked about that there were a number of deaths that led to the coordinated response. And I shared with our county commissioner that in 2016, in Transylvania County, 5 individuals lost their lives due to domestic violence. And our population is about 33,000. And so if you take our population and compare it to Buncombe County population, we were shocked to think about that 5 people in our community with that population had lost their lives. And so at that moment, driving back, we agreed that we needed to do more in Transylvania County. We knew we could not do what Buncombe County is doing. I mean, it's amazing how much the county commissioner supports your Family Justice Center, We are in some small rural communities. We don't have that type of local money that can support that type of initiative. So we decided to take what we refer to as a collaborative impact model, where we wanted to bring together all those different groups, our sheriff department, our police department, our district attorney's office, mental health, our hospital system, our school system, DSS, health department, everywhere we thought that a victim would show up to seek services, whether it was services for domestic violence or not. We wanted those partners to be a part of our initiative. And we got them together thanks to our county commissioner, who has a lot of pull in getting people to come to the table. And so we came together. We've been working for over a year now. We have actually formed what we're going to be calling a family resource center. It's a little different. We feel that people in our community would be more apt to come to a facility that's called a family resource center rather than a family justice center. So that's the reason we changed the name a little bit. Thanks to a grant to save for our collaborative impact model, we are now able to move forward with this project. One of the things we first recognized that we all had data, we all had information about domestic violence, but there was no centralized place to share that information. So part of this grant that we have is going to be creating this centralized database. So hopefully in a year, you ask us that question in our rural community, then we will be able to give that to you. But I do think when you're talking about rural communities, those rural communities must establish their programs in a way that would be embraced by their individual communities. They cannot go to Buncombe County. We don't like the big city to tell us, what to do.
And just to maybe wrap this question up, I wanted to just mention that there are domestic violence and sexual assault services in every county in North Carolina. Okay, so there may not be a shelter in every county, and there may not be a full-fledged, fully staffed agents site in every county. But every county does have resources. So there shouldn't be a county where someone goes and is not able to access services. The problem is transportation. That's kind of across the state, no matter where you go, especially in rural counties that have no transportation services. There's no taxi, there's no buses, there's just flat out no transportation unless you call ahead. And if you have, some of those have those transport vans that will take people to doctor's appointments and that kind of thing. Those are not available in the middle of the night to help somebody get out of a situation. So there are services across the state in every county.
So we understand there are services, but when a person, a family is in a massive crisis, probably one of the worst things that a family can
law
experience.
Enforcement, yep.
They rely on law enforcement. Okay. So a scenario here for you. If you know someone who believes that they're facing a domestic violence, or they're committing domestic violence, or they're a victim of domestic violence, what's the recommendation for those folks and for the community that supports them or the family that knows them? What do you all recommend?
So I'll start this question off. I just had a close family member contact me with the same question. She has a relative who's experiencing domestic violence, and I think one of the things I've learned doing this work personally and professionally is that initially challenge the belief that a victim of domestic violence needs to leave their abusive partner. Accept that people care about their partners. One of the things that happens and that breeds the isolation that can continue to really breed parent control and lead to more abusive behaviors as family kind of cuts themselves off and says, well, that's the last time you're going back to them. I supported you. So that was what I said to her was, she said, I couldn't possibly even be in the room with him. you know, you know, I asked her, you know, so how can you be in the room with both of them? Because once that support is cut off, more and more and more supports continue to get cut off. So, you know, it takes an average of 7 to 8 times, they say, you know, for somebody, and that might be anecdotally, to leave an abusive partner. So that means a lot of, you know, going back to family, going back to friends, going back to support. That could be so hard and so challenging to see somebody you love, somebody you care about go through that. But I would say keep showing up, keep being available, you know, so that they always have you as a resource, and hopefully, you know, they get to a point where they can talk to you about it and you can help them maybe safety plans, you know. But if they don't see you as support and they see that you're judging them or judging their partner, you're not going to be the person that they go to safety plan or when they need to get out.
But can you talk about when there's children and pets involved? I mean, that is much more complicated, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if I'm putting words in anyone's mouth here, but as a mother, I would think that it's a lot more complicated. It's a difference between just interacting with the partners involved when there's children in the household as well. What's law enforcement's responsibility or domestic violence agencies' responsibilities when there are children potentially or and pets potentially at risk here as well?
Well, we have certain protocols that deal with both around animal control and our animal ordinances and abuse of an animal. And then with children, we absolutely have stringent protocols that will involve calling DSS and having them come in and be part of that investigation as well. You know, you're kind of hitting around the issue that is a great conversation, that even the experts in the room sitting around that table at our FJC, we're still working through some of these issues. And it's kind of what you're talking about. You know, the outcome's not always to separate the family. Depending on the nuances of that relationship, the danger, the history of that batterer, you know, there's a lot of things that go into a good outcome. The outcome is the best for everybody involved in that family situation. That's a tough conversation.
Yeah.
But we are really getting into those things and having those conversations around that. I'll give you one particular example. Conviction rates on domestic violence arrest. That's a number that you have to look at with some real scrutiny, in that we are sending, now because we have a pro-arrest policy, we are sending many, many more cases to the district attorney, who they are at the table. They have a representative there at the table, the FJC, and very, you know, that collaborative response that we do across the table. But just by the nature of their business, we're sending many more non-cooperative victims for prosecution, which makes the case way, way tougher. And then also you have to look, there might be 3 or 4 charges. Well, the best outcome is they put in, they're convicted of one, but they enter into treatment and they get in this litany of things that they're responsible to do from that point forward. So it really is, even with the folks who understand the nuances of domestic violence, it really is a very detailed conversation around outcomes, and are we doing the best that we can do to ensure those things are happening.
Yeah. Well, and to echo the 2 folks have already mentioned, I think that support piece is critical, and the fact that you need to stay there for the person. They don't always need rescuing. You know, that we want to rescue somebody from a situation or help them out. And that's, I think, being there, helping them with the safety planning. If you know somebody that's in a situation like that, your domestic violence agency in your county can help you with safety planning information that you can, you know, just kind of, a lot of it is done very covertly, you know, on the telephone numbers or on the back of emery boards and that kind of thing, so that somebody can keep it in their purse and not divulge to their abuser that they're seeking services. All domestic violence agencies work within their counties to try and with their local animal rescue or humane society or whatever, to be able to take somebody's animals and shelter them for them. Many of the agencies actually have shelters. Safe in Transylvania specifically built a space on their shelter property where people can bring their animals, so they're right there with them. We do service animals and comfort animals in our shelters, and so that's available. I wanted to mention, to your point about what happens with someone. Statistically, we collect, so I also manage the Batterer intervention programs for the state of North Carolina, and they report our statistics to my office. And it is interesting to know that we had a total of, this is going to be very shocking, Batterer intervention programs received 3,934 referrals from sources such as criminal court, civil court, Department of Services, mental health agencies, and others. So 3,934. Compare that to the domestic violence shelters serving 48,000 victims. So the percentage of people who are actually ending up even getting a referral to a Batterer intervention program, I mean, I think I did the statistics, it's like 5% or something like that. Mm-hmm. So the numbers of victims that are, 48,000 going through shelters and receiving other services from DV versus 3,900 offenders who actually go to the point of being referred to a Batterer intervention program. That's abysmal.
So who makes those referrals again? Is the court?
So they come from a variety of services. The rules are written around court-ordered individuals, but we also work with Department of Social Services. You'll get referrals from mental health, probation and parole, substance abuse agencies. They come from a variety. The most of them are coming, these that we're referring to right here are criminal court referrals.
And how are the success of Batterer prevention or Batterer treatment programs? How is that measured? How do we measure?
Yeah.
Recidivism of the individual who receives the programming. We've got the Spark Network here with us today, which does our Batterer intervention program, and they do a lot of other things. And you were asking about referrals. We have a focused deterrence program. We've got one for violent criminal offenders, and we also have one for DV offenders, to where we bring them in and basically say, hey, we want you to fix this. A lot of them do not have pending charges. Some of them may depend on the charges where they get included. But what they all get is the opportunity for resources to get them into a program. And I was just asking the folks, I asked Tim Splane when we came in, I said, can you give me some quick facts? And he was just looking at it. He said, what I can tell you for a person who comes through Batterer's intervention here in Buncombe County with the Spark Network, it is a less than 10% go out after completing and reoffend with a charge of domestic violence. As far as other criminal activity, it's a little lower. It's like in the 70 percentile range. But they're dialed in around the issues of family violence and trying to measure that as best we can with when they reoffend. It's just a little less than 10% for the folks who come through their program.
And is that over, maybe these folks can measure, is that over a year, or how long are people in those programs, and how long are they?
It's probably a year's worth of data, maybe a little more. Year and a half.
What I want to first say is I'm real committed to offender programs, and I actually am the facilitator of our programs in Transylvania as well as in Henderson County. Personally, though, I think I know law enforcement and the court system loves to use the recidivism percentage as a measure of success. Our recidivism is, only 10% also, so it's a pretty consistent number with Buncombe County. But I think it's the worst number to use, because sometimes what happens when offenders go through these programs, the thing they learn the most is how to keep out of the legal system. Right? And so it doesn't mean that offender is not still perpetrating violence within his own household or her household. We work with women also. it just means that they've kind of gotten smarter about the system. Personally, though, in doing the groups, that generally what happens is when somebody comes in, ordered or referred into the program, we do have people who come voluntarily. So just FYI on that one. They generally come projecting blame onto the victim. Oh, it's all her fault and I shouldn't be here, I didn't do anything. And so generally what you see in our programs, maybe not in the other programs, is for about the first 4 to 6 weeks, you have this really denial, the minimization of the violence. But after about that 6 weeks, you almost see a light bulb turn on. And they actually start listening and paying attention, although I suspect they were listening and paying attention the whole time, but they start engaging at a whole different level. And from there on to the end of the program, what I experience is individuals who really are serious about trying to do something different. I believe strongly that these individuals who perpetrate violence, domestic violence, which is really elements of power and control, they don't do it because they are mean and horrible people. They just really don't know how to communicate in their relationships. They don't know how to resolve conflict. And their own sense of self is so low that they think that the way they feel like a man or feel like they have some sense of power in that relationship is to become abusive and controlling. And they don't even recognize what they're doing. And so our programs really try to and help these individuals to understand that the behavior they are using, that we define as abusive through power and control, really have such a negative impact on their relationship with their partners and their children that they become motivated to start changing. The problem is, our program is only 26 weeks, and we're talking about changing behaviors. And all of you who are clinicians know that you cannot generally change behaviors in 26 weeks. All you can do is get it to a conscious level and then encourage them to keep practicing. It's really encouraging when people keep coming to your program to keep working on it, even when their court has said you completed to 26 weeks and you don't have it. In Henderson County, I have a man who came through the program, and when he first started, I really was worried that he would go postal on people in his community. This person now is one of my co-facilitators. Mm-hmm. And the reason he's a co-facilitator is because he can speak truth to the other men in that room and say, I was there. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're feeling. But let me tell you that that's not going to get you what you want. It's very powerful.
If I could, if you don't mind just adding, so Meridian, we run a batterers intervention program and a program for sexual offenders. And the recidivism question really got me thinking, and so I started posting it on the listserv, and so B. Cote, who does amazing work and has been doing work locally for a really long time in TV, is one of the people who wrote back reminding me that it's a systemic question. Our batterers are going to engage in the services. Recidivism rates are going to, mirror the coordinated community response again. That's not my answer for every question, but it was just such a good reminder that we need to continue the patient. For us, we use the Duluth model right now, which the Duluth Power and Control Wheel. The Duluth folks have been around forever. They've been making legislation in the domestic violence movement, violence against women for a really long time. We use their curriculum as well as starting to use Emerge. Council for Women has provided a lot of learning opportunities for us to use best practices when working with batterers. And the Duluth model says that there's about a 30% recidivism rate when they look at it, when somebody has completed the program in the 26 weeks after a year, and then again looking at it at 7 years. I also agree with everything you're kind of saying about experiencing folks who have committed domestic violence coming in the space, that those first, sometimes it feels like 2 to 3 months for me, but 4 to 6 weeks, that there's a heavy, there's the denying, there's the blaming, there's the minimizing. It was their fault, it was the victim's fault. I can also say that we recently hired a peer too in our program who went through the Batterer's intervention program, and I allow folks, once they are done with the 26 weeks, they can come back for free anytime. And so this gentleman just kept coming back week after week after week for a year, and eventually we hired him as our facilitator because he can speak directly to the power and control tactics in a way that I can't. So anecdotally, I think it's like anything. If somebody's committed to the self-awareness, which is a big part of Batterer's intervention, is looking at your own behavior, that cognitive behavioral model, and then changing it. I've seen a lot of success, but also that not 10%. I wish it was 10%, but I've seen closer to 30%.
One thing that I wanted to add, so thinking about this, systemically or system-wide, as a country and actually internationally, this question of whether Batterer intervention works or doesn't work has been asked and has been studied, and recidivism comes up, and again, we're looking at behavioral change. These are people who experienced it as a child, most likely. They either experienced it themselves, they saw it, they heard it, somehow or other they were impacted and they didn't learn how a good relationship looks like. So the prevention piece is huge in this whole piece, and I think you have a question about that a little bit later. But my point that I always bring up is that when we look at domestic violence, we very often concentrate on the victim, which we absolutely should. I mean, that's where our first effort should be, to make sure that the victim and her family is safe. But if we don't do anything about the offender who is causing us, they go from victim to victim to victim. A victim becomes a survivor who then becomes somebody who speaks about it and is able, hopefully, to get out of that situation. That offender goes to the next person. And we have repeat offenders, and I'm sure we've seen them here, where it's over and over and over again. You can look at the address and it's the same person over and over again. If we don't begin to look, nobody wants to deal with that side. That's the really unpleasant, ugly side of it, the person who's causing this to happen. But if we don't put some emphasis on that side, we're not going to stop it. We've got to do the prevention, working with children, all the way up through working with the offender, because again, it happens behind, as I said before, it happens behind closed doors. Offenders do their work behind closed doors. As a community, it's behind closed doors. Here in Buncombe County, we've really made an effort, as counties where there's a good, strong trust that's built up and people are working community-wide to address it from lots of, we're looking at you, we know what you're doing, we're watching you. When you get to that point, then I think is where we really have an impact on ending this. It doesn't work in all cases, but it's better than sending an offender out there with nothing. Yeah. At least they're hearing the message and they know that somebody's paying attention to what they're doing.
I've been doing this work since 1985, and the face of domestic violence looks different today than it did in 1985. And I think over the years that we've learned a lot. We've mostly learned from our victims and the offenders that we have been working with over this long period of time. The way we look at it in Brevard in Transylvania County now, that this issue is a family issue. That you cannot really just work with one isolated piece of that family and believe that you can actually solve this issue of domestic violence. So we kind of take this approach where we work with offenders, we work with victims, and we work with the children who are being taught that love means violence. And so we are trying to approach this issue in a multifaceted way.
Salley, can you walk us through the difference between 85 and now? I mean, if I could make an assumption that in 1985 it was mainly the father or the man versus the woman as the victim. Is that still the case? Can you break down the genders? What's happening?
In 1985, I was working in the basement of City Hall, and I show up to work on a cold February morning, and a woman and her 2 children were sitting on the steps of City Hall, and they had been there. And she told me the story about what happened the night before. That's not the significance of the story. What the woman told me, that she grew up in a household where her father would beat her mother, and would grab her children, and they would run out into the woods and spend the night until her mother thought that their father had calmed down so that they could go back home. That's the difference. Before domestic violence programs existed, women had no choice but to run out of that household and spend the night. That story has been my motivator for this work since 1985. I can only imagine the horror those children must have felt, cuddled up next to their mother in the darkness of the woods. This was in Henderson County, so this is the mountains. In February, it's cold in the mountains, all right? So that's how we got started. In 1985, mental health centers existed. They were community centers. So people who had issues of substance abuse or mental health could go to these centers and get help. In 2017, I'm here to tell you, mental health system in North Carolina is in disarray. There is no mental health centers. So by the time victims and offenders get to us, they are so toxic that we can't even do we work from the empowerment model, which means you have insight and the ability to make healthy choices. But because the issues of mental illness is so the primary issue, we have to get that taken care of before we can even address the issues of domestic. Well, if they don't get Medicaid or they don't fit within the mental health criteria, they can get services. And so, we finally got some grant money. We switched to some of our own money to pay for private clinicians to provide mental health services. But that's the biggest difference between 85 and today. We don't have adequate mental health services where people can go and take care of themselves before it gets. And now we give them guns. And say, here it is. And so now that's when we're seeing more deaths. I mean, law enforcement. I would not want to be in law enforcement today and respond to a domestic violence issue.
Can we talk about 50B a little bit, maybe, Sharon? When a person who has experienced domestic violence in North Carolina seeks an order of protection called a 50B, they fill out a form that asks them to describe any firearms that the abuser may have in the house. And law enforcement is expected to ask the alleged perpetrator for these weapons when the person is served. However, the courts have said this is not probable cause for a search. Even so, some advocates have argued that if the individual denies having guns, despite the accuser's sworn statement to the contrary, it constitutes probable cause, and that the suspect has lied to an officer, and thus grounds to obtain a search warrant, etc., and to seize those guns. So, what approach best balances public safety and the constitutional rights of those people who are being accused?
Yes. Set up that way, and I think it should be, is a judicial function. So when that 50B happens, outside of what law enforcement is directed, and there's making an arrest on a domestic violence assault, which is a misdemeanor not committed in your presence, and it's a pro-arrest policy, that's extremely strong for the state to do that. I can't think of another misdemeanor where you're directed that you shall make an arrest for a misdemeanor that was committed outside your presence as a law enforcement officer. 50B is kind of the same way as far as civil orders. It's really teeth to it. 7 to 10 days they're going to be in front of a judge and hear what's going on. And at that point in time, the judge has a lot of authority and leeway to order certain things to happen depending on what they hear in testimony. I'll be honest with you, to stretch it out there to say, because you can take that same way of thinking of what might constitute probable cause for a search warrant if somebody lies to you, I think that's probably not real good solid ground to do it. I think law enforcement's role is collect if you can, absolutely seize and take where you're not violating law and individual rights. Try to ensure the safety of that individual that has taken the order safety plans and working with our partners to get to that point to where they can get in front of a judge, a judicial official who can make decisions and give directives from the bench that we can then act on. And that's kind of how I see it in a fairly general way of how that takes place. Now, there's laws around domestic violence about being able to buy a gun after being convicted and things that are very restrictive in nature. And so, did that answer your question?
Well, yeah. If you look at fatalities for domestic violence,
sure,
the majority of those happen due to gun violence. Is
absolutely
that correct? Okay. So what's the public policy answer to that? Is there one? I don't know. Is there a systemic answer to?
I think dialing into the root causes. You know, the gun issue, you can quickly wind yourself, and that was when I was here last.
Yes, it was. We did kind of talk about guns
we sure were. And you can quickly lose focus of the things that you have immediate control that you can impact, that will have an impact on the safety of that victim of domestic violence when you really start rolling it out to a much broader issue, if that makes sense, what I'm saying. Trying to make sure that you have laws and statutes in place like North Carolina does and the 50B statute. That's one argument, and when you put that together with a big issue that in a lap, we identify that in a lethality protocol. Is there a firearm? It's one of the big 11 that will indicate that this is not going to end well for this victim. So it does. The knowledge of that, whether we're in a position to legally take that firearm or not, the knowledge of that firearm being present in the home is direct response.
And that's documented, and that information is passed along to the other services, the other coordinated services. Is that how that happens?
Yes, with a coordinated community effort that we have at FJC.
And believe me, we are blessed in Buncombe County and the collective approach to what happens
It's hard work.
in this.
It is.
Took a long time, a lot of work, and which is still going on to build that trust among systems, because everybody has policies and protocol and procedures that you have to follow. Sometimes understanding what those are and why somebody can't do something is not sometimes, always helpful to know the reasons behind. You get out into other counties, and every judicial district operates differently. You would think, my thought was always that, if the courts operated the same across the state. They don't. They are judges. They're individuals who come into those judge positions, which is, again, just as a caveat, why it's so important to pay attention to when you elect your judges, who you are electing. Because it really does, it does directly affect you, how those judges act in cases. That being said, back to the point of across the state, the judgeships are different. They go to the School of Government for education, and so we are really systematically trying to get more domestic violence education happening for judges and magistrates and clerks. But again, each one, and you have some judges that have been around for a really long time. And I remember one in another very small community, very small county, not wanting to check the box about making sure that there were no guns, because the person he knew individually had some antique guns in his possession. And once you take those guns, they have to be kept somewhere. And he felt like he didn't have the a safe place to keep these antique guns, because they have to be oiled regularly to keep them, to the worth of the guns. So
a purchase permit, which is problematic in itself, but you see what the point I'm making is. So they may get to the point to where they can own, but they can't buy.
Right.
And then can they get their guns back from the sheriff's office, which we've been storing for a year?
And after the Batterers programs, can they get them after that as well?
You know, those things are all determined by what they're convicted of, how it relates to the statute, and what the judge keeps in place around the 50B.
A point you ought to keep in mind that statistically, very few abusers actually murder their victims. And so, necessarily, from a domestic violence perspective, for us, it's not the issue of whether they have guns or not. A 50B is just a piece of paper, let's be honest. If somebody wants to kill you, they're going to find a way. So, statistically, what we do is we talk about safety planning. How should this woman keep herself and her children safe from this point forward? And not just, her abuser. What women is that women should think about keeping themselves safe. I mean, how many of you park your car, get out of your car, and run into the grocery store, don't lock your car, get your groceries, and run back to your car without even stopping and pausing to think who's standing around your car? And so what we do in a domestic violence program, we simply try to teach women how to be, just mindful about your surroundings, your environment, and keep yourself safe. The best about this whole conversation is prevention. Don't put yourself in a situation where you could get injured. We have no power whether the courts order, the guns to be seized or not. What we know is some of these individuals who have guns will tell people, oh, I gave those guns away, or I don't own those anymore. It was stolen. I mean, they never, own up to the fact that, they have guns. So why would we, as domestic violence programs working with victims, focus in on, oh, we got to get the guns away? It only instills more fear in her. Fear controls. As long as she is afraid and lives in fear, she will not be empowered to move forward. So our job is to help them to overcome the fear and move forward. So we don't really have those conversations about guns.
So I'm going to maybe relate some of that answer to you anecdotally with something that happened here in Buncombe County, and try to be very mindful of the victim or the victim's family. So if they hear this broadcast. We dealt with a particular situation, and we were up and running as an FJC. I would say, I don't know that we had moved in, but we were fully functional in the beginning stages about how we were working together in partnerships. And we had a situation in Buncombe County that we were all fully engaged in. Everybody. We were aware. We were doing the wraparound services. The abuser in this particular situation, we knew there were there that might be somewhat unfixable with them from a position of stability and getting them to move forward. We did everything we could in a coordinated community response. We took that individual's guns. At one point in time, he went out and acquired a weapon, went back and killed the victim. And I'm going to tell you, for us, because one thing about a coordinated community response is we all own the outcome. And that's when you got a partnership. You don't have people sitting around the table blaming each other. You've got people sitting around the table going, how could this happen? How could this still happen even though we engaged? So for folks who think you can complexity of an issue like this by saying if we can just get the guns, or if we can just get them into batterer's intervention, or we just have the resources to move the victim out every time, they really don't understand the issue completely.
In some cases, these people need to be in prison.
Absolutely.
You know, that's the way you
Absolutely.
keep the victim and the community safe.
And you've got all along the spectrum, as Kathleen was talking about earlier. And having a group that can really look at what is our outcome, what are we looking for, and trying to get that accomplished as best we can. And I'll finish that story with saying, because I don't want to leave you depressed, because it's still depressing. But the good thing that may come in the future is we're working very hard right now to get a fatality review in Buncombe County that will allow all those people at the table to sit and share all information across the board about this particular case, and not from an assigning blame, but from really a blameless synopsis of what happened here, an assessment. How can we do that better? Where did something fall through the cracks? Or if this would have happened, maybe we wouldn't have had this outcome in this situation. So that's why that partnership, that trusting partnership, and that coordinated community response is just vital in this issue.
I don't want to provide the answer or this question or the answer that you may give, and the answer may be no, but is there a public policy, is there a legislative point of view here that is lacking or that needs to be created? What is the answer? May be no. It might be in the
it's resources around mental health. We can take about most of the issues that we've come in here to talk about with you, and that's going to be a component right there.
Yes.
Adequate resources around mental health. The catch basin is not a jail or the street or.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mean, absolutely resources, you know. I was kind of waiting for the opportunity, this opportunity today. Our program serves the 7 most western counties. We're the only batterers intervention program in the 7 most western counties. We're the only sexual abuse intervention program in the 7 most western counties that provide services for people who have used violence, domestic violence, and the state just cut all of our funding. So it is a larger issue. It is a larger conversation when it comes to legislation. I mean, there's so much that Kathleen is doing, Council for Women, and there's so much work that is being done. But again, it's a political conversation as well. You know, what's happening in the state, what's happening, you know, in the region, what's happening in the country. It's, you know, and unfortunately the program is, you know, and I absolutely agree with Kathleen, and I agree that, you know, if we're to batterers intervention programs and offender services as part of the issue, we're losing a whole piece. You know, at Meridian we do comprehensive clinical assessments as part of people coming into the intervention program, but because of funding we have to charge for that. You know, we have to charge $200. That'd be hard for me to pay. So resources, finances are absolutely a barrier. So, yeah.
And speaking to the piece, both NCCADV, which is the North Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and NCCASA, which is the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, both of those organizations are nonprofits, coalitions at the state level that do put together a legislative agenda, and you can go to their websites and see what they're looking to bring in front of the legislature each year. I happen to have a copy of the NCCADV because I was looking to see you know, what they are focusing their attention on. And believe me, you know, we would love to attack everything right now as far as let's get in and let's get some changes happening. But as you know, with the wheels of committee, then it goes through the committee work and, you know, so wheels move very slowly, and what they do at the state level, any of us, you have to prioritize where you feel you have the most support. Gun legislation is certainly not something that anybody wants to take on right now. You know, it's not there. We live in a bit of a bubble up here in our wonderful part of the state. As you go to other areas, and I'm sure many of you have heard many of the comments that are made around what we believe very strongly in, and not everybody thinks the way we do, and you have to decide which battles you're going to pick. And I know that they talked about some of the private. They just passed the disclosure of private images on the website, and they were able to get that legislation actual. Angie's, I believe that's the the Angie's law came from that one. There's some technical provisions. So you have the long year and the short year with the legislature, and you have to look at whether it's going to cost money to do something. That's a big piece of it. Legislatively, there's a lot of work going on. If anybody is really interested in digging into that more deeply, again, go to the coalitions and look at their legislative agendas, and I'd be happy to share more information around that. But
there is a bill that's getting ready to go to the floor that will allow that fatality review for Buncombe County, and if it doesn't get tied to another issue that gets it, and I don't know what that, I mean, I'm not that versed with all the political issues that's going to take place, but that's something that where we are in our evolving and dealing with this issue of domestic violence, that would be a very helpful piece of the legislature that would let the table and do that. Some communities may not be there. There may be an argument why that might not be a good thing for a community that's not where we are right now, but right now that's another process in what we do at the FJC and about best outcomes that the legislature can help us with.
Yeah, there are not very many fatality task forces in North Carolina. Mecklenburg has one. And interestingly enough, Mecklenburg has a fatality review task force, but they don't have a family justice center. They are working to try and get that together, but they don't. So it's interesting that it's the opposite of where we are. But they, whenever a death occurs due to domestic violence, then they do come together as a group to, as you say, try to figure out what could we have had in place. Where did communication break down? Was there something that could have happened that might have precluded this happening, or what do we need to do to get something in place? So, yeah, if anybody, if you have the opportunity to talk to our legislators about that, I'm sure they're already on board, but let them know that you're behind that if that's something that you'd like to.
I think there is bipartisan support for that.
So
I think Chuck Edwards is trying to push that too and wants that to happen. So.
Marie, in terms of budget cuts for your specific program, or maybe Batterer prevention programs, is that through mental health funding, or where does that money come from? Batterer
interventions, just for everybody's knowledge, do not get any money from the state of North Carolina. Okay, there's no funding that comes through state or federal dollars right now. But there are a couple of grants that some have gotten, but yeah.
So we are, Meridian Behavioral Health is a mental health, community mental health organization that serves the 7 western counties. And so part of our offender services as staff has been historically by clinicians. So part of the work we do is to provide those clinical assessments, the substance abuse assessments, treatment recommendations, In our offender service program, where we do batterers intervention, and then we also do the sexual abuse intervention program, which is a very different long-term treatment program, they have been housed together and have shared funding that comes through state and federal because of clinical assessments. So for both of those programs, because they're housed together and because they're staffed by the same clinicians, that all of the funding has been covered.
Well, I'm sorry I took a little bit of time, but are there any questions from Mel? Yes.
Me?
Yes, please.
Okay, two things.
Yeah.
We've been doing this work for a long time. I started in 85 and 86 too. I think the part that is so concerning to me is that we have all this understanding about the dynamics of domestic violence, and even with a coordinated community response, we're still not going at it like we should. We could stop this. I train hostage negotiators in California, and I have learned over the last 17 years that hostage negotiators can and should consider domestic violence victims their chief source of intelligence because she lives with a guy. So if all the systems would listen to her, I know that's what we do, help me, but if all the systems would listen to her and empower her and have her say, this is what he's going to do, back of restraining orders from all over North Carolina. And it's interesting to look at those orders of protection, because in those orders of protection, in the complaint motion, said this is what he's going to do. All those women were murdered in the exact same way they said they were going to be murdered. So one of the things for me is that I think our criminal justice system, and I ran a CCR down in Chatham County, there can be all kinds of sanctions put on abusers, monitoring, you name it. But the thing that I'm still most concerned about is that we still expect women and children to completely rearrange their lives because of male violence. And the model, the program that I'm the most excited about, that's not anywhere in the United States, but I hope somebody somewhere does it before I die, is what they've done in Tel Aviv, Israel, where they looked at the lay of the land and they said, why are we telling women and children who have been abused that now they've got to go and flee and run and hide in a shelter and stay in that shelter and leave behind their schools, their family, their friends, their pets, all that sort of thing in order to stay safe. So what they did in Tel Aviv was they opened up a residential treatment facility for abusers, and the abusers go in there for 4 months. And while they're in there, they get everything. They get abuser counseling, one-on-one stuff, they get parenting classes, they learn how to cook and clean. It's a complete rearrangement, and it's presented to them as an opportunity. Here's your chance to learn how to interact with your family in non-violent, non-threatening, non-coercive ways. They've got a much higher success rate with the Tel Aviv model than what we do in the United States, because it is so comprehensive and because it is the community saying to the abuser, we will not tolerate anymore you abusing your family, and here's an opportunity to learn a different way. And then the kids and the moms get to stay in their homes and carry on with their lives. So it's just, I just keep hearing we expect still women and kids to run to shelters. And I know our shelter stays full all the time. And I don't know if y'all have been on the line with a woman who is desperate to get into a safe place and to have to say to her, I'm sorry, there's no room at the inn. It's just really awful.
What is the option then? If I may ask, and you all can answer that. When a shelter is full, what do people do? So besides stay, I mean, is there another?
Well, we try to work with all of the neighboring programs. The good news is that a lot of the neighboring programs understand that when we're full, Buncombe County, it's a big county, so we tend to get full. They're oftentimes really good about saying, let us help you, or we've got a room or whatever. We try to keep beds open for emergency cases, but it's just, it feels like we've got our finger on the dike, is what it feels like. Yeah. And then the other thing I want to say quickly is it's great to do fatality reviews, but all communities could do mock fatality reviews, where we bring everybody together and we're not working with an actual dead body, and we try to examine where the holes in the system are and plug those holes before there is an actual dead body. So there's ways of actually working to prevent this, where we don't have to wait for Raleigh to pass a law saying, okay, now you guys can do fatality reviews, because we could get all the players together right now and write out a really ugly scenario and bring everybody together that is going to interact with this family and figure out where the weaknesses are in the system.
Yeah, in answer to the question about shelter, most of the services that are provided by domestic violence agencies is not shelter. If you look at an agency, it's a small percentage of the work that goes on in an agency. I want to throw that out there so that you don't have the impression that what domestic violence agencies do, what they do, is just shelter, because it is. Again, it's a small portion of the numbers of people that are those 49,000 people that were staying in shelter. Those are people who are in shelter, okay, not the people necessarily who sought other services. Court advocacy, hospital accompaniment, transportation, information, counseling. The state has mandated services, one of which is sheltering services. There are counties that, if their shelter is full, and believe me, most of these shelters are full a lot of the time. They don't have empty beds. Sometimes they will use a hotel room and have people, if the people who are seeking the services, the individuals, both men and women, by the way, all shelters serve both men and women. I've heard it say that there's no shelters for men. That's not a true statement. Men, as well as LGBTQ, the community, all services for all people. They might go to a hotel room. Obviously, you can understand the safety issues around doing that kind of service. But it's not always easy for someone to pick up their home and their children. As you say, they have to be the ones who flee everything that belongs to them. Many times they're animals, and go to another county. Well, what about school? What about their job? What about their pets? If you think about having to leave that kind of situation, you might not necessarily want to. I wouldn't want to do that. So again, as you get even farther out into rural counties, those people really don't want to go to a big city. That's not a familiar territory to them. They don't have any support system there. So there are a lot of issues around the sheltering piece. It's not an easy situation. Mecklenburg County has a shelter that has 127 beds, which is huge. I mean, this is a massive complex. They're full all the time. And so everybody from Mecklenburg County who can't find a place to go has to go to a surrounding county. Now you have a smaller surrounding county who has maybe 5, 6, 7 beds, and you're taking people from another county. What do you do about the people in your own county who don't want to flee to another county? It's a terribly complex situation and again, layers of an onion as you begin to peel back why things happen and don't happen. There are very few shelters that, at least sometime during the year, or often during the year, are not full. They usually are full beds. 5 to 12 beds is kind of a common average for the number of beds that are available. I think Helpmate has, how many now? 20, yeah. So if you think about it and you've got children involved, those rooms get filled up very quickly. And this is not something, they're in one night and out the next day.
What's the average stay? Do y'all know for Helpmate?
Varies by county.
For you?
Yeah.
Oh, we actually added 4 units as kind of transitional housing units to our shelter. So our women can stay up to a year or longer. They can stay as long as they need to be in our shelter. What we did, we discovered, we keep stats, and we discovered that the longer a victim is able to stay in our facility, the more likely she will create a household where there's not violence. So we support our victims.
What's the average stay for y'all?
Because we're a small county, we don't have housing, we don't have it. The average stay now is probably somewhere between 4 and 6 months.
Oh, wow. Okay. Is that similar for Albany?
Our goal is to have people in safe housing within 3 months, but then we also have plenty of people who only need one night, and then they can stay with their aunt in Florida or something. So I think it ends up averaging about 14 days.
Okay.
I want to ask a question about prevention again, and more about how do you prevent people from becoming violent people anyway, domestic violence. I mean, do you all know of any proven programs like in the schools or anything that work? And if are they happening on a regular basis in schools across the country?
Well, I can respond to that. SAFE, we are in every 6th grade and 9th grade of Transylvania public school system. And we've been there for about 5 years. One of the things in response is that when you talk about prevention, to know whether that program is working, it takes time and so we do our data. We actually are starting to test in the 12th grade just to see if those students are retaining what we taught, teaching. We teach safe dates and healthy relationships, that type of curriculum, but we're also doing other things within the school system and outside the school system. This summer we had a week-long empowerment camp for young girls where we taught a lot of different skills. And so we're trying to, because I believe that's really where we need to be, is in prevention. We could work with victims all day long. And prevention for us is twofold. Children and youth. Let's try to keep young people from learning the behaviors of power and control within their family that are being taught in the families. But we also see our program with the offenders as prevention. Whether we make a difference for that individual who's coming through the program, it gives us a chance to make sure that victim understands that he went through a program, he didn't change, and so she needs to do something else. So we see that as prevention also.
The problem that you run into if you work in government or you're funded by government is whatever you do, and we were talking about measuring the effectiveness of Batterer's intervention by recidivism. It's not a perfect measure, but it's something. And if you do it and you're government funded, you have to measure. That's just part of the metric. The problem with prevention is there's really not, it's tremendously hard to measure. The other piece that we know that's kind of just the antithesis of the whole thing is we know it is the most cost effective and the best in dealing with the problem at a root cause level. Our officers received training this past year around dating violence. They really didn't want to call it domestic violence because when you're talking with these young folks in school, they're afraid that they'll miss that nuance and they'll go, well, I'm not domestic violence, but my boyfriend controls me physically. Or so yes, we have had some awareness that is in the thinking that we can intervene and there can be some prevention there, but therein lies the problem. How do you measure it?
And there's limited funding for prevention. Everybody wants to fund, the victims. Nobody wants to fund, offender. But prevention. There's very little money out there to fund prevention because you don't have those immediate results of the work. And so
and part of the issue too, along with that funding piece, is time. Every school district is different in every county. Some are very open to having people come into the schools and work with their kids. Others are very closed. There's the whole spectrum there. And although schools are limited in the amount of time that they can bring in other, they're cutting out music and art and all these others. The first things to go are these types of programs because they're teaching to whatever they're told they need to respond to keep their school ratings wherever they are. So it is very encouraging when a school system allows a domestic violence or sexual assault agency to come in and do work with their children. And it's very often done through health classes. That's often where you'll find it. I found the Jamie Kimmel Foundation for Courage is out of Mecklenburg County. Again, they are a foundation that helps they lost their daughter, the Jamie Kimmel family lost their daughter to domestic violence, and so they've started this foundation. But they have some wonderful resources. The Enough campaign here in Buncombe County, if you're familiar with that, if you're not, please check it out because it's a great awareness piece. That was started by the Jamie Kimmel family and is now supported by that. But they have this curriculum, Promoting Healthy Dating Relationships in Teen. It's a toolkit for implementing this is a Charlotte-based domestic violence club. So some of the agencies will go about it as an after-school project because they can actually have some time then with the kids. So there's lots of different ways where the community, these agencies that have the training and the curriculum can get in there and work with the kids.
Can I take a stab at that, right? Because I think it'll help from an analogy kind of draw what we're looking at. Probably everybody's familiar with the DARE program. We get a lot of questions. Why do you not mention the drug abuse resistance education in school? Limited time. So what they found out from the DARE program, and you will hear good and bad, one of the big flaws in the DARE program, and if you're familiar with juvenile justice programs, there's a term called dosage units. So in DARE, everybody got the same dosage unit. It wasn't really directed towards kids that might have that issue or trouble. So what they found out was exposing kids to that issue around sometimes was counterproductive if they were not in a particular situation where they should be given that type of counseling or that type of prevention. So what the school system's looking at, and from my basic understanding of David Thompson and what they're looking at with Buncombe County Schools, is a way of identifying kids because of situations or things they've identified, and then give the proper prevention to the kid who's in that situation. Now, I can tell you with domestic violence, we have talked, and I'm not sure exactly, but there is a lot of talk about sharing that information with the guidance counselors in high school. So if you've got a kid, or in middle school or in grade school, so if you've got a kid that's exposed to domestic violence, just like you were talking about, most batterers were abused when they were kids. So that is a good way to look and identify and start with your prevention program. So I think there is a lot of thinking and a lot of looking at programming that will address specific types of prevention, intervention, where we know that there's for that individual child.
Can I just say something about our Enough program? So October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and HelpMate is going to be putting up silhouettes that will attach to the walls, and this will be both indoor and outdoor. It's a big campaign that's going to happen across Buncombe County. We're looking for partners that will let us put up these silhouettes. You can pull them off after 3 months. It doesn't hurt the wallpaper, the painting, like that. And on each one of the Enough silhouettes is going to be the story of a survivor from Buncombe County, and it's going to give people a chance to understand who's been affected and how. So if you're interested in maybe hosting a silhouette, please call Christy Price at HelpMate, and we'll be happy to, because this is a city-county initiative along with HelpMate. So.
Yes, I'm actually asking more than anything for services in Spanish. The people that I serve in Henderson County are all Spanish speaking. A lot of them don't have papers. If they have a problem getting housing, even if they have been in a shelter. I had a problem in Henderson County with the shelter just being full 6, 7, 8 months. Yeah. And where I needed to go actually to Polk County with one and to Transylvania County and another. And I don't know what to do with some of these clients. And also the Batterer intervention programs, I don't know how many programs they have in Spanish either.
Yeah. Well, I can speak direct to the Batterer intervention piece. Right. So the Batterer intervention programs in North Carolina operate under the rules that were established back in 2004. Those rules were designated or directed toward court-ordered individuals, and also, males and English speaking. Mm-hmm. So it's about time to begin looking at those rules to understand the fact that they're not all male, they're not all white, they're not all, English-speaking people. That there are all these other individuals who could benefit from the services if they were either culturally specific, linguistically specific. Many of the agencies, the Batterer intervention programs, have Spanish-speaking programs, or they actually have a Spanish-speaking facilitator. And in North Carolina, in the region, the Western North Carolina region, do you have Spanish-speaking? And I know Henderson County has had. I don't know that individual is there anymore.
So we have had a Spanish-speaking Batterers intervention group. Absolutely, more can be done. I wish that there was like a better answer. I honestly wish that I could say we are like doing our best for the LGBTQ community. We're doing our best for communities of color, but way more needs to be done. Way more honest conversation needs to happen. We offered the Spanish-speaking Batterer intervention class, and once those referrals were done, we didn't get any more. And again, it goes back to the coordinated community response. It goes back to not just financial funding, but the resources that people have who are doing the work who don't have the financial funding. And so I don't think there's like a good answer. I think it's a great question. It hurts my heart that the answer is not, there just aren't the services. There needs to be more services. And just in thinking about this conversation, I'm so glad to hear about all the great stuff in Buncombe County. But
it's still a hard problem.
Yeah, and I just think about our folks in Haywood-on. Isolation because of language is an issue. Isolation because of LGBTQ status, because of any identity status, because of the community, and the sheriff is my brother-in-law. That's a real issue, and I'm just really kind of holding those folks that, there are domestic violence shelters, there are DV programs, there's our program, but there just needs to be so much more. So it's such a great question.
And also with mental health, finding a counselor that will counsel a person directly instead of through an interpreter.
And interestingly enough, and again, like you say, holding those issues really close. As you go farther east, I think in Buncombe County, don't we have 49 different languages, I believe, that are spoken just in Buncombe County in the school systems? I think it's 49, something like that. As you go farther east, it increases. I mean, because we're not an incredibly diverse, Western North Carolina is incredibly diverse. As you go farther east, there's much more. There is a out of Raleigh area called Kiran, K-I-R-A-N, and they work with southeastern women. So India and in Pakistan and that region over there, they do specifically designed services for that community. It's a wonderful program. They're starting to expand into more of North Carolina now, but they've got great services there. But they have a huge community there. No services for batterer intervention. Yeah. Again, you've got to have somebody who understands the culture, who speaks the language, and the curriculum should be designated. It should be different than what is used right now. So yeah, again, those layers of the onion to peel back.
Yes. I have a question. I work with Family Preservation Services Act, and I have a client who has experienced the DV. They have had the Asheville Police Department come out. He's busted out her door, and not arrested. She has several mental health diagnoses, and when she was hospitalized, her partner came to take care of their son that they had together. And she has been to help me, and they helped her get housing. And filed. However, he's not getting arrested by the Asheville Police Department. Maybe he does these things, and she can't, he just sort of came to take care of the child when she was in the hospital and stayed, and he won't leave.
So any recommendation?
I don't know what to do.
You know, the answer to that particular situation is going to be in the details. If he's there at the hospital and it's in clear violation of the 50B, he should be arrested. But you know, sometimes we think we know it may not be the case. I'm not trying to shift fault. Yes, that would be, and I can't help but think that if that got pointed out, that would get fixed.
Well, it has expired.
And that,
I
well,
met
that's
with her yesterday
okay.
to try to talk her into filing another one.
Right.
And perhaps going back to help me, and she's not wanting to.
And that is because the system for, I call them survivors, the system is so chaotic, and I think, I'm Buncombe County born, and I moved to a neighboring county. Seeing that difference is not, I'm not happy with. And as a practitioner, it's something, but then working with clients, it's a totally different story. But the system is so, I need to get my word right because I'm passionate about this, and I'll say something that's probably wrong, but it is so against the victim. She doesn't want to, for what? Why would she want to go to court, get another 50B, and nothing is done? I have gone to court. I'm a survivor myself, and I put that out there. I have gone to court in my county, and my number one did not come to court because they did not know where he was at. I had to tell them where he was. Number two, the second time I went to court, had to take off, had to go to court. They got him here, but they took him on the wrong day. That's not my fault. I talked to the DA and let them know this is re-traumatizing the victim. Well, I'm sorry, I understand. No, you do not. You do not. And I understand. Thank you for this panel. I was sitting here like, shut up, you don't need to be saying too much. But that's just not me. When it comes to the DAs, they need to be up here. Because they need to be educated about what happens to the survivor when they don't do their job. I understand the system. I get it. We didn't put it in place in time, and then they continue the court date, which is another issue, and then you got to get yourself together because I got to go see this person, but I still love them. And I got to go see this person. And then you get there and then they're not there. So they need to be on this panel as well. For me as a clinician, as well as a survivor, I would love to see prevention programs where in other parts of the United States, there's survivors go to prisons and talk to the inmates, male and female. And I would be willing to be one of the speakers, going into the schools, having outside programs for schools since there's not enough time for schools. I'm passionate about that. I was trying to be quiet. That's why I said in front row.
And that's what we need. You know, we need your passion, and we need that passion to spread to others, because we all come to this work, to this issue with different backgrounds, different needs, different resources, different energies. And you know, thank you for those words. You know, and congratulations and bless you for getting out of that situation. It is not easy, and none of this work is going to get done individually. We, the four of us, and the buku people in the audience and that are listening, you know, we can't do it by ourselves. We have to work together, and we have to keep the victim central in what we're doing. But I still maintain that if we don't do something with these offenders, do more with the offenders, excuse me. The case management piece that Spark is doing here in Buncombe County. You know, if we don't do more with the offenders, they're just gonna keep finding another victim.
And I'm sorry, here I go again. And another issue that I've seen is if the abuser has an extensive criminal background, they can't get services. I've seen that. They have been, I'm not going to talk about
The offender
agency.
can't get services?
I'm sorry?
The offender can't, the
Yes,
user?
if substance abuse is involved and they seek substance abuse treatment because of their extensive violent history, they have been turned down. I've seen that.
Oh, ouch.
I've seen it.
Can I know you're about out of time, but I want to say something about what the people from Helpmate said. You know, we speak with one voice, that victims are the experts, and
Yes.
we should listen to them. They're the ones who will teach us the most and help us to find the answers and solutions. So we do speak in unison. The other thing that I agree with the people at Helpmate is that domestic violence is totally preventable. The way you stop it is that every citizen takes a strong stance and says it will no longer be tolerated in our communities, our neighborhoods. No, no, no. Offenders don't like the public to know what they're doing behind those closed doors. And until we as a community start speaking up and saying enough, it will continue. And I think, you know, I've been saying it forever. I will say it until, you know, the day I die, because I don't believe our community has the courage to speak up. When I listen to the media and they ask people about what, you know, when there's a murder, what happened, they say, well, I don't know. He was such a good guy.
Yeah, and why didn't you
You know, they know what happened. It was domestic violence. Why don't they name it? Rather than just trying to find the problem that with the victim. Why did she stay? Why did she do that? You know, label the problem correctly. And it gives our community a power to start speaking up.
Well, I think that's a good spot to stop. We want to thank all of you for coming today to the forum, and I hope it was interesting and informative, and I hope you all will connect with one another. When we walked in, everybody was talking to each other, so I felt like you all do know each other. But if you don't, please introduce yourselves and ask questions of our panelists.
And if I could add, there are some pamphlets that I've brought from my office that are out on the table there. I have this is a partner guide that the Batterer Intervention Program share with the victims of the individuals who are in the program. This has good information around Batterer Intervention, and then there's also a North Carolina Council for Women pamphlet in case you want to know our website, where you can go for statistics and some other information around the issues that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have, we're having another forum in September. The Huffington Post is collaborating with us on some reporting, and they'll be here in town, so it'll be not only a local and regional forum, but it'll have a national audience as well, and that'll be on women's health in rural hospitals. So I hope you all will come out to that in September. And follow us at Carolina Public Press and support us if you can. And thank you all again for coming.
Thank you for having us. Yeah, thank you.
Donna, who's your brother?
He's in New York.
Oh. I thought he was be a local. It's going to be one that's a small one.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. Sorry about that.
What do we need to do to get you out to? What do we need to do to get some kind of public forum? It would be like we're just always like What if like next year for domestic violence awareness month you can partner with our like 30th judicial district so we can get all of our folks to get the DA's office, get some extra service. That would be awesome. Yeah. Because we just need more visibility, you know, especially like, you know, like how are we losing our funding? How is the community not freaking out? It's like it's not necessarily happening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes.